Welcome back to the Zeitcast, friends. It's awfully good to see you. My name is Jonathan Martin, and this is a space where we explore intersections of theology and culture, of spirituality and culture. And one of the things that I really wanted to do in this particular moment that we're in is to be able to feature some of my wisest friends, some of the pastoral and theological and prophetic voices that have most shaped me and that I want to most shape the church. It's such a thrill to be able to bring some of those voices on, and just for the sake of my own soul, to have the capacity to have a reason really to be able to talk to some of those folks. So yesterday, it actually worked out pretty last minute for Jared McKenna to join us from Perth. And many of you are very familiar with not only Jared, but the great Dr. Drew G. Hart. I know a number of you, like me, are a fan of the Inverse podcast and the Inverse community. If you're not, then you decidedly should be, because I really think it's one of the best things going right now, and one of those kinds of spaces that help keep us sane and help keep us grounded in terms of this ultimate call to Christian discipleship that we take very seriously. So just before he comes on, I'll give a little bit of formal bio here. So the Reverend Dr. Drew G. Hart is an associate professor of theology at Messiah University and has 10 years of pastoral experience before teaching. So he currently directs Messiah University's Thriving Together Congregations for Racial Justice program. And of course, he co-hosts the Inverse podcast with Jared McKenna. I really cannot commend his books more highly to you. These are books that have been highly influential for me. I love the particular convergence of disciplines, the streams that Drew brings together. A couple of those books: Trouble I've Seen, Changing the Way the Church Views Racism, 2016, absolutely crucial resource. If you have not read it, just cannot commend it more highly to you. And then, of course, Who Will Be a Witness? Igniting Activism for God's Justice, Love, and Deliverance. What a crucial resource that is. And that's one in particular, really both of those books that I've passed around to a lot of folks, given to friends. He's also co-editor and contributor to the recently published book, Reparations in the Theological Disciplines, Prophetic Voices for Remembrance, Reckoning, and Repair. He received BCM Peace's 2017 Peacemaker Award and the 2019 W.E.B. Du Bois Award in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and most recently in 2023, Life Esteem Ministries recognized him in Harrisburg with the Harrenby Award for the Saba Principle of Imaju, Unity for his faith-based activism and public scholarship in the community. So, he's really one of those wise guides and voices that I love to hear from. I'm not seeing Drew pop up yet, so we'll take just a minute to catch up. Before we go further, how's everybody doing? How's everybody feeling? A lot to metabolize, a lot to process. Oh, hey, you're staying connected. I hope that you're taking good care of each other. I know here at DePaul, I got to be part of a lot of conversations yesterday that Dr. Drew Hart.
Hey, what's going on, Jonathan?
You should be really grateful that I had a Wi-Fi issue. You didn't have to be humiliated with my overlong introduction, because I feel like, sometimes like, but yeah, no, I was just gushing about you, and I really, I can't say enough about how honored I am that you would take this time to be with us right in the midst of all the things. You're just one of those wise guides that I trust most in the church as to how I make sense of things that are happening in the world. And what a gift for you to take to join us in this space right now. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, always glad to be in conversation with you, Jonathan. Deeply appreciate you as well.
Well, your work and witness, and one of the things I was saying about you is just the convergence, everything in terms of your just Anabaptist theology and Black church, and then the kind of cultural critique that I feel like you're able to uniquely do. It's such a particular sound and such a needed sound right now. Before getting into anything else, though, I really do care and want to know, how are you doing in this moment?
Yeah, wow. I've had all the feels, the full range, right?
Mm,
I think I texted that to you yesterday. Like I've just been everything from a little irritable, honestly, which I don't think I'm normally an irritable person, but I was a
sure.
little irritable at times, but also just taking it all in, internalizing everything and frustrated, a lot of frustration that we're back here again at the same point, it seems. In fact, in many ways, worse situation than we were even in the past. So,
Yeah.
yeah, taking it all in and trying to get mind, body, and soul in the right
Yeah.
place to move
Yeah.
forward, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What has the vibe been like on campus for you, like with students and faculty and staff? And
So the interesting, so I'm actually on sabbatical this fall,
oh, that's
which is an
right.
interesting
Okay.
time to
Yeah.
be on
Yeah.
sabbatical, right? So I certainly feel like I've been able to escape from some
Mm,
of the potential nonsense that would have been happening, besides a very complex space
mm,
in terms of politics, race, all of that kind. It doesn't fit into a lot of the other categories of, you got really fundamentalist schools. You got the
mm,
semi-conservative like Wheatons and Calvins and things like that. Besides, not as conservative as those, but it's also not as, justice oriented as like the Mennonite schools like EMU and Goshen and stuff like that. It's this complex space that it fits in. And so
sure.
I've been grateful to not be there right now. But
Yeah.
actually, I've heard that students this semester overall, I don't know since the election, have actually not been talking as openly about politics on campus
Mm,
as they had in 2016 and 2020. So I don't know
yeah.
what that means. I
Yeah.
don't know if they're tired themselves. I don't know if they just don't feel like having those kind of conversations is a safe space for them as conservatives within an administration and institution that maybe pushes a little more towards peace and justice. I'm not
Mm,
sure what that means, but there's something going on there in terms of that doesn't seem to represent what's going on a larger scale.
yeah. Then that makes a lot of sense to me because I know here, and I also don't know how to interpret it, but I feel like because we were kind of doing the thing, all of our university centers on campus, trying to provide some space for students to process and talk and that thing. And the way I would describe yesterday is that it's the quietest day I've ever seen on campus,
Hmm.
like right in the thick of a semester or full on. I mean, I talked to one student yesterday who had a class of 30 and 10 people showed up. It's like it almost seemed like people were sort of hiding out in the rooms and kind of withdrawn, but almost eerily quiet. Seems to be, which I don't know exactly what that means. One of the gifts I feel like that your work brings for us is just being able to contextualize what's happening in the world in terms of a larger story. So I
Yeah.
guess I'd just start with like the broadest question that way in terms of like in these last couple of days, what do you see in terms of how you situate what's been unfolding in the broader story that your work's been telling for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see happening right now is just the ongoing ripples of an wave that took place first. I mean, I would say there are two big waves that took place in our history, in church history, that make sense of where we are today. The first one would be the Christendom
Mm,
wave, right? That's Constantine, that's Theodosius, that's there's just this ongoing development of Western Christendom and the ways that the church got in bed with the state, coercively imposing
yeah.
a diseased vision of Christianity violently on others and enforcing uniformity, right?
Mm,
Um, and so we could talk about Charlemagne and all these different emperors and such that shaped Western Christianity. And the assumption that Christianity should have dominance and control over society, right?
mm,
That mindset itself is something that develops over time. It's not something taken for granted in early Christianity, and certainly not in our scriptures. And in fact, Jesus explicitly goes against that posture,
yeah.
right? He says, the Gentiles lorded over you, not so
Mm,
among you. All right, so we
mm,
have that. But then there's another wave. And really, I mean, we could go as early as 1441. We begin to see Portugal enslaving African people, right? And so the West gets involved in plunder and enslavement and conquest. The church produces doctrine of discovery, which actually is the theological and legal justification for plundering and engaging in colonial conquest all around the world as Western nations as they go and encounter others. And so that happens throughout North Africa. We see that in the Americas and such. And so I feel like so much of what I'm seeing right now, this is, from a more analytical, when I step back, I'm like, it's it's no surprise that the white church disproportionately and overwhelmingly supports Donald Trump, who has been explicitly racist, right? And I know, I mean, even yesterday I had somebody jump on my page. Well, I'm not racist and all this, jargon. Look, he's been very clear about what he's been about, right?
Yeah.
Even if someone wasn't aware of his past, right? The 70s when he's being sued for, not allowing black tenants to live in his apartments,
Sure.
or in the 80s when he's putting out full page ads condemning the five black boys, even after they were exonerated, he continued to push for death penalty and all that kind of stuff. Even if people don't know all the old stuff, it's very public knowledge in terms of his role in the birther movements, pushing that Barack Obama was not, a citizen, pushing, Haiti, African countries as shithole countries, anti the Black Lives Matter movements, right? Calling it a symbol of hate and a bunch of thugs. He's helped to push the anti-Black history movements in the United States of pretty much minimizing the role of slavery in his 1776 projects and erasing and concealing all the anti-Black oppression that has been a part of our society. He's been so explicitly. And then other groups of Mexicans, right, as thugs and rapists, Puerto Ricans, he had a guy on there recently making a joke about, a floating pile of garbage.
Right.
China, right? The Chinese virus at a moment when our nation needed leadership, right? So we see explicit anti-Black racism, but then much broader racism all throughout. And so, and many Christians are aligning with him, despite his clearly not being Christian, precisely because they want power. They want dominance. They want nostalgia. They want to go back to the days when, the 1950s, when white people were in power and things feel stable, and they have this nostalgia of what that moment was about. But it's an explicitly white supremacist and racist vision, because that was actually that was way worse in terms of oppression and exclusion for all people, right? And so I think that I like to see it in light of that history. And unfortunately, the white church, the mainstream white church, continues to be one of the most death-dealing, violent, oppressive forces in our worlds, right? And that's one of the things that we've got to grapple with, is what do we do with this large segment of the population that claims Jesus and literally looks nothing like him, refuses his way of life, refuses to yield to the Spirit and what God is doing in the world, right? That's some of the frustration and the challenge that it certainly places on folks like me and you, who also claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, right? To take on that name, but then we're caught up in the mess in the vandalization of the name of Jesus Christ in the public square.
I love, Drew, by the way, that like in that riff there, obviously these aren't coming from like notes. You're giving examples off the top of your head from the last couple of years. It's like just
it's not that hard, right? It's just so much. Actually, the tricky thing is to be able to keep. It's so much. We're inundated with so much racism. It's hard to keep track of so much going on, right? So we forget more than we remember, because it's almost like weekly that he's saying something so offensive to somebody that you can't keep track of it.
And yet, of course, as always, I was joking the other day that I have yet to meet a racist. Like, I just like, no one is kind of like, oh, I'm a racist. I'm like, literally, apparently no one is racist. The thing that's been wildest to me this time is that, more so than 2016 or 2020, is that while the racism has always been the defining feature, not the bug, not the proof, like whatever, this time in particular, it feels like it's really it's not just the animating energy, it's actually all that they've been talking about, to the point to where when I have conversations with Trump voters or sympathizers, he'll say, well, for me, it's about the economy, or I think tariffs will work or something. Yeah, but he actually doesn't ever talk about any of that. I mean, it's
No.
just, it feels like this is all that has been led with this whole campaign.
Yeah, no, it's been so upfront. I mean, especially the anti-immigration, anti-Latino rhetoric in particular,
Yeah.
right? And how scary they are and how they need to protect white women, right? And all that stuff. I mean, it's just been so upfront. I take it as disingenuous when anybody pretends that it's otherwise. I've been in Pennsylvania, man. Like it's rough being
Oh,
in
I
PA.
can't even
You
imagine.
you can't enjoy anything without just nonstop. Every single ad. There's not even a
Yeah.
break. We don't get no toothpaste ads. Nothing. You know, it's just political ad one after the other, and it's just been explicitly racist the whole entire
Mm.
time. And the images too, right? So you have the racist rhetoric, and then you have black and brown images, right? And how it's destroying the fabric of our nation. And so there's no hiding what's underneath in the underbelly of this movement. It's been very explicit. And so I take people at face value. If
Yeah.
this is okay for you, then I understand where you stand. I understand how you've been formed in the world, your lens, right? It's a racist and anti-black one. You might not see it that way because you're so steeped in it. You think it's okay,
Yeah.
but that it's
Yeah.
obvious. There's nothing, it's not even a debatable point at this moment.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm wondering what it looks like for you right now in terms of conversations you're having with people that you know, in terms of, I mean, this is the work that you've been doing for years, but in terms of disentangling some of these things. And, you know, when I talk to people, as so many people in my life, who are deeply disillusioned with the church, and they mean white evangelicalism in the United States. But when that name brand becomes such a mark for so many people for like what Christianity is,
Yeah.
just what does that look like right now in terms of these conversations about how one even begins to disentangle? Because I know a lot of the streams that have most informed us people may not be connected to, like in their communities on the ground, and are still right now in that phase of just kind of like, yeah, well, if this is what being a follower of Jesus is, then I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I have been a big advocate for is encouraging folks to learn from the folks who've been Christian on the underside of these
Yeah.
realities, right? This is not a new problem. So if I just talked about centuries of history, there's also centuries of history of faithful witness on the underside of that,
That's
right?
right.
And so for me in particular, and these are not exclusive, these are not the only two Christian streams that can offer us insight, but the two that have shaped me most significantly directly helped me grapple with the ways that Christendom and white supremacy and anti-blackness have shaped Western Christianity and American mainstream Christianity in particular, right? And so the first one is Anabaptism, being birthed out of 16th century movements. Anabaptism of the 16th century is not what many people think of as Anabaptism today. And
Yeah.
I'm actually one of the hardest critics, right? As one who's got a foot in that world, also one of the hardest critics of what I call white Anabaptism,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Especially in North America, the way that many white Anabaptists assimilated here. And I tease my white Anabaptist brothers and sisters. I say, like, look, I'm grateful that y'all knew that it was wrong to engage in slavery, enslave my ancestors, right?
Mm.
But you don't get a cookie for not enslaving someone.
Right.
They were also
Yes.
politically quietists at that moment for
Yeah.
much of their
Yeah.
history here. And they also weren't the ones to physically remove, indigenous people from their lands.
Mm.
But the moment they were pushed off the lands, they claimed them for cents on the
Mm.
acre, right?
Mm.
While the blood hadn't even been dry yet. So
Mm.
there's some complicity there, but they did have a rejection of the alliance of church and state, of coercive top-down Christianity, and invited people to begin to see and understand the peaceable way of Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, right? Um, and there's things I nuance and push on. In fact, that's one of the things I'm working on right now in my writing, but I think that they're actually a helpful witness for the church and what it means to be a community that embodies the way of Jesus Christ together. But of course, because my critiques that I just made, they don't offer some insights, the best insights in terms of how to live under a white supremacist's colonial reality, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the Black church has been terrific, and it's been a gift not only in the U.S. but all around the world. People have looked and sought to understand the ways that they resisted, navigated, and mediated white supremacy and anti-Blackness that had been so fused and mangled into the Christian witness in America for so long. And there, I mean, we have the beautiful tradition with Black from very early. We're stealing away at the risk, danger, right?
Yes,
Breaking
yes.
away, carving out a space for them outside of the watchful eye of white masters where they could encounter God and one another in a way that was authentic to them. And that's, the birth of a really powerful tradition where they rejected, right? A lot of people talk like, oh, Black Christians just adopted white Christianity. No. They heard those stories and they reinterpreted them for themselves. And they're like,
Yes,
nah,
yes,
that's not what I'm getting. And that's not the God that we're encountering. And so they encountered a liberating
yes.
God, right? Jesus, who was a co-sufferer with them, a friend in hard times, right? Someone they could call up in the midnight hour and know that God would be their presence and through the hardships that they were navigating. And so I think that we have this tradition that then is bent towards freedom. It's bent towards liberation. It's bent towards justice, right? But in a world under severe constraints, right? Where where the society is literally organized against, deem them non-human, property, chattel, commodities, right?
Yes.
And yet they had the power and the beauty and the creativity and the willingness to yield to what God was doing. And the Black church has been the greatest force for love and justice in this land, right? And working for the benefit, the socio-political expansion of freedoms and well-being for all people, right?
Yeah.
They've laid the foundation and the framework for that. And so I think for me, those two traditions are really powerful for grappling with Christendom and white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And especially right now, since white Christian nationalism is a really hot topic. I think those two traditions and how they come together and offer a robust critique are actually quite helpful for right now as well.
It's one of the things I love so much about what you do in terms of the way that you live at the intersection of those two traditions. And where one of the ways I find it to be, even talking about the Black church as the greatest resource that we have for love and liberation in America, it's some of the conversations I'm having these days, because in all fairness, most of the folks who are just kind of straight up white evangelicals just aren't talking to me anymore. I think most of them have written me off by now. Yeah. But a lot of the toughest conversations that I have are people who come generally for, and gosh, like Stanley Hauerwas was so influential to me, is so influential with me. Yeah. But folks who are kind of Anabaptist adjacent, and they would share
Anabaptist.
Yes. And they would share the critique, I think both of us would have about, Constantine and empire. And yes, there are very real ways that it's all empire. And yes, there are very real ways that whole system is very broken. And yet, what I can't get beyond right now, and I feel like the Black church doesn't give us permission to do, is that the house really is on fire in a very immediate way for people that we love. And sometimes my concern is that those voices can become kind of apolitical in a way that just really is almost kind of living in denial of reality of what's really happening on the ground for real people that we love.
Absolutely. That's been my constant critique of the kind of white neo-Anabaptist movement overall. There are some exceptions. Not everyone fits into this, but there's this, they imagine, and some of it is rhetoric, right? And how different things have been interpreted. So like there's the language of third way, right? Yeah. And that can be interpreted in two different ways. I mean, you think about like Walter Wink's framing of third way is a powerful and revolutionary nonviolent response to oppression and injustice and the evil in this world, right? That's great. I love that. But when we're talking about third way, and a lot of times in the Anabaptists, it's a centrism, right? It's going halvesies. It's halvesies of really serious situations, right? And so what does it mean to go halvesies when you got a neo-fascist who's taken over, right? Who's been explicitly racist, who's harmful to just about everyone but white men,
Right.
and has now no limits and reins on the kind of no checks and balances, no accountability to what he can engage in. And so I think that
Mm.
the inability to kind of be rooted, especially in terms of the the lived experience of, we could say the crucified of the world, right? Those who
Yes.
have their backs against the
Yes.
wall, the faces at the bottom of the well, right? What does it mean for us to know and those lived experiences and stories and hold them tight and sacred in a way that transforms how we live, because we know what's at
That's right.
stake, that the stakes are actually really high, and
Mm.
that for some of them, I feel like it's like, oh, it doesn't matter, God is going to be God and we're just going to be faithful no matter what. But they don't, like, I've got neighbors who I know I'm worried about
Yes.
deportation for one of my
Yes.
friends, right? And
Yes.
this young boy who's one of the good friends of my son, like, they're already in the system caught up, and they're
Yeah.
not, like, this is not
Yeah.
abstract, right? I'm thinking about policies and practices. I'm thinking about the impact, the decades and decades of harm that will cause if we push even further back on
Yeah.
Black history, right? The denial, the impact that it has on actual policy and practice in our society. And so I think that I'm deeply troubled by the neo-Anabaptist movement overall. I
Mm.
think it's pretty sick. I think
Mm.
that the centrism is void of actually grappling with the Jesus story. Jesus
Mm.
is not a centrist.
No.
Yes, he does not engage in the same way as the revolutionaries
Yeah.
do, right? He rejects the zealot option of killing one's enemies, but he gets confused by his own
Yes.
disciples as a zealot because he's so committed to the oppressed and the vulnerable, the least,
Mm.
last, lost, the
Mm.
little ones, right? Those that are most suffering, those on the edges and margins of society. And so that should be our lives as well. The church should be so deeply identified
Mm.
that sometimes people are like, yo, these folks might start slitting throats. We don't know what's going to happen, right?
Yes.
Because they're so
Yes.
committed and so bound up and tied to the lived experiences of those who suffer most.
Yeah.
And I think that is missing in
Yes.
they've lost that part of the Jesus story. And so I think there's a returning back again and again to the Jesus story, and it should then reorient us back
Mm.
again to those in the cracks and
Mm.
margins of society.
Drew, I'm just about to have to put my phone down to have to walk this out and talk in tongues just a little bit, because this is so, like, this is just it's medicine right now for because I think the thing that drives me the wildest is, like, folks will use language that people have used that actually are radical language, like, as you say,
Yeah.
and even Walter Wink. The third way is a radical way, but then in practice, when it turns into this idea that, like, well, somewhere between love and hate is
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, what
Right.
does that even mean? And this was part of the riff I was going on yesterday, is this notion. I'm curious as to, I don't know that this language is the best, but I keep thinking about this difference of kind of between, there's a stark contrast between being in the middle and that kind of centrism, and the kind of prophetic in between that is not a place of escape, but actually puts you in a much more vulnerable place. Although, like, you're much more at risk to kind of live in that kind of in between. But the in between for me is not the same thing as the middle.
No, not at all. Because the prophetic posture and the prophetic stance, right? The prophets, right? On one hand, there is a distance, right? From the systems, the powers, the authorities, the establishments. There ought to be a healthy distance so that we can critique it. But it could be anywhere. To assume the place on the spectrum prior to having had God's inspiration,
Yeah.
revelation, and seeing the incarnation of Jesus Christ in our lives, and allowing those things to inform our reasoning and our lens. If we haven't done those things, then it's still actually an ideological move,
That's
right?
right.
And so I think that we've got to actually take seriously, again, the Jesus story, the movement of the Holy Spirit, the example of Christ in the world, right? And then figure out, what does it mean to participate in what God is doing in the world in our own contexts. And there is no starting point that we already know what that is, other than the faithfulness of being willing to stand in that prophetic space, and then when called to speak and challenge and confront injustice and evil and the death dealing forces that are in front of us. And so, yeah, I have to say, there's times where the Jesus way is so far. I mean, even just globally, right? I know,
Mm.
so Jared will tease us Americans about how our spectrum is so conservative,
Right,
right? When you think
right.
about it,
Yes.
but even that, like, there's times where the prophetic posture is going to be so far off of our
Yeah.
spectrum in ways that it to be thinking about being in the middle, meeting halfway
Mm.
somewhere between Republicans and Democrats is such a diseased and distorted and has nothing to do with following Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah.
That really
Yeah.
is not our call. It's the insurrection of the reign of God breaking into the world is what we're
Mm.
supposed to be participating in.
Mm.
It's God's dream for creation, right? God's shalom. And as we participate and struggle and hope and embody, make visible the Jesus story in our lives, then we have a sense as we actually
Mm.
live it, right?
Mm.
That's all that really matters.
Yes.
Truth can't be just something, it's not about what we hold or possess.
Right.
Truth is embodied, truth is lived, right? And it's uncontrolled,
Mm.
and it's a gift to the world by God, through the church when we are vulnerable enough to actually participate and yield to that.
Mm. That's so good, Drew. Through the church when it's vulnerable enough. So many things that you're saying, and yeah, like even to Jared's critique, I do when people say things as you do when I say things I do about Trump and whatnot. People are like, oh, you're like a leftist. Like, oh no, actually, we have no left. There is no left in America at this point.
There's no left.
But the idea of like of just how far off the grid this way of being, because one of the concerns I have, I'd love for you to be able to speak to for folks right now, because I am thinking about a student I talked to yesterday who's afraid that their mom is going to be deported. I'm thinking about our girls right now who have really just in this last cycle, they've come to a kind of age and a kind of awareness now where especially the stuff around sexual assault and what does it mean for all of these conservative Christians that we know to
Yeah.
not take that seriously. And so of course there's like a lot of fear, but it's not as if there haven't been moments like this before. What resources do you specifically think of right now from the tradition, from these
Yeah.
luminaries and saints that we know that for
Yeah.
you right now are critical resources for how we navigate this moment, for folks that are looking for some kind of grounding?
Yeah. And this, what my answer is actually going to be a little bit of a critique to some of the past few decades, the way that some mainstream Black Christians have talked about our own tradition,
Mm,
right? Because I think we've missed something much more profound about our tradition. In recent years, and I understand why, there's good motive, right? So in recent years, there's been a reduction of the witness of the Black church as though what we've been fighting for the whole time is the vote, right?
mm,
And people died for your vote.
mm.
And I get it because they want people to get out because it's important and it impacts people's lives. These policies are significant. But by doing so, we actually ignore the centuries of work that we did so much without the vote,
Yeah.
right? We were organizing, resisting the abolitionist movement, right? All kind of stuff was going grassroots from under slavery, under Jim Crow, and those
Mm.
means of networking and resisting at the grassroots level are the very thing that brought us the
Wow. Yeah.
vote, right? Right? And so the vote is important, but it's not the political witness of the church.
Yes.
The political witness, I mean, it's one piece that we can express ourselves through, but it's not the totality of the political witness of the church. The totality of the political witness of the church ought to be on the ground every day, organizing, working for long-term social change on behalf of those that are most vulnerable in our
Yeah.
communities, right? That's the work of the church. So I think when I look back, I'm really grateful then all of a sudden for the Harriet Tubmans and Sojourner
Mm.
Truths and Frederick Douglasses, right? The Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois's, right? Randolph's and King, and
Mm.
we could go on and on and on about
Mm.
all these folks, right?
Mm.
Diane Nash and
Mm.
such. That this cloud of witnesses that showed us what it looks like on the ground, right? To move forward. I think Ella Baker, brilliant,
Yes.
right? Brilliant,
Yes.
thoughtful about community and leadership, leaderful communities, right? What does it mean to learn from that
Mm.
wisdom of folks
Mm.
who've been at this? They've seen, right, American empire can go back and move in all different directions. There's no linear progress,
That's
right?
right.
And everything, we've got to be co-participants with God, struggling for the well-being and thriving of our neighbors. We
Mm,
can't just be sitting back and just waiting for elections and then praying,
yeah,
right? We've got to be
yeah.
fully all involved in participating and making, or pursuing God's dream in this place. And so I think that
Mm,
um, we we've got a great cloud of witnesses that we can look back to, that we can be inspired to, and it encourages us to actually embody the Jesus story on the ground in the public square. And what's powerful about the Jesus story is it climaxes with a confrontation. That's the
yes,
climax of
yes.
the story,
Mm,
right? And we pretend because we plucked the cross out of context, out of the
right.
story, we miss that the story, it especially I think Mark and Luke do it
Mm,
great, right? Really help you see that this is an inevitable clash of
yeah.
the reign of God with the establishment, the powers and authorities. And he bears witness and he demonstrates and he flips tables and he evokes the prophets, right? I
Mm,
mean, he's literally quoting from the prophets, you den of robbers. That's
yeah,
Jeremiah 7,
yeah.
right? And so there in that space, we are invited then to be a prophethood, a grassroots on the ground where, yes, we have and should be frustrated by the turnouts of this election and the implication it's going to have for so many different people, right?
Yeah,
Across the board, the rights are diminished. Fascism
yeah,
is on the
yeah.
rise, right? White Christian nationalism is becoming more and more a reality in our
Mm,
nation. And so I think
mm,
that we can see all these things, but we're not without means to actually engage. We don't have to only use the formal mediums given to us by the state,
yeah, yeah.
right? The approved methods. We can bear witness 365, 24/7. And I
Mm,
think that's part of the gift that we can get from the Black church and the history of the Black church over many centuries as well.
mm. That's so good, Drew. And on so many levels, I mean, even this thing of like if it all becomes, if any form of activism resistance is reduced to the vote, then it's like, okay, well, then what do you do the day after? It's just kind of like,
Right.
so I'm so grateful for the way that you contextualize this and connect us to some of these broader influences. I'm wondering what you'd say right now. I'm feeling so good. I feel like walking. I'm wondering if like in this moment in particular, because I do think there's a lot that while the moment is not unique historically in so many ways, and there also is a real sense right now that 2024 I think is different than even 2016 or 2020 in terms of
Yeah.
where some of these other narratives have advanced, how far that they've come, where the where Trump is in all kinds of ways. I'm curious, knowing that you're still metabolizing all the things that you are, just like any of us in this particular season, what do you imagine resistance looking like, given just the particularity of some of these realities as they continue to take shape right here, right now?
Yeah, probably moving in two directions, right? One is that we've got to carve out spaces where we can be, where we can give, receive, and share
Yeah,
love in community, and that is resistance,
yeah,
right? It doesn't. I know for some folks, oh, that's not the sexy work that they want to be involved in, but that's important that we actually know how to be human with one another, create beloved community, resist the hierarchies, the ways that we've been formed, that we can carve out and make a radical break from what the mainstream society is doing. That's important work that we've got to cultivate in our lives as
yeah,
well. And that's the work that the church has always, it was always supposed to be. That is the calling of the church, right?
yeah,
To be
yeah.
that body. It has not often been that, but that's what it means to be church, right?
Mm,
And then, but then there's, for me, it's the public witness,
yeah,
right? And sometimes it's covert. I think there's some public work or socio-political grassroots work that is covert and some of it is public, but it's actually working on behalf of our neighbors. And so I think
mm,
everyone's got to figure out like, what's the work that's already happening in our communities,
yeah,
right? First and foremost. So if you're worried about, your neighbors that might be undocumented. I know for me, like there's a group called Milpa right here in Harrisburg that works for immigrants and undocumented folks, and I've done lots of work with them
Mm.
in the past. And I'm expecting that, I'm assuming the moment Trump gets in office, there's going to be need because of whatever it's executive orders or what, that we're going to have to be responsive. That means that we've
Sure.
got to be in place already, right? You can't wait and get ready. You got to stay ready. And so I think
Mm.
that there's some ways that we can connect. Who are the other folks doing community organizing, right?
Mm.
Again, Pennsylvania, Power Interfaith has been a great space for multi-faith organizing work. So figure out in your own communities who's doing that work and come alongside. And we have to be committed to the long haul,
Yeah.
because I know,
Yeah.
like, I've seen the big turnouts when Trump does something
Sure.
horrific. And I remember, like, I spoke at the one early events when Trump was taking kids and parents and separating them and putting them in cages and such. And there was an enormous response in Harrisburg, right? I mean, we had
Mm.
folks all around the entire block of the governor's mansion, right? But a few months later, when we're still pushing on these issues, because in Pennsylvania, we have Berks County Detention Center, right?
Mm.
One of the three. And all of a sudden we got like 50 people again, right? So,
Mm.
like, where'd everybody go, right? So we got to be in it for the long haul. And so there's this ongoing work that we've got to be a part of. So yeah, I think that's, for me, I think community organizing, it's nonviolence training, right? Understanding how social change works,
Yes.
movements, participating in what's happening, right? I think that there's a way that we ought to have, like, the Jesus story is a public story.
Yes.
It is
Yes.
it is the gospel lived out in the public square, right? And so what does that mean for us to show up in that same way, in that same manner, as followers of Jesus? And not just followers of Jesus, but honestly, like, we are called to make visible the Jesus story, because it's no longer us, but Christ living in us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that mean for us to embody that, so that people see glimpses of the Jesus story in our
Mm.
lives as we show up for our neighbors in the public square? That's my hope,
Mm.
right? And that's what's going to be necessary. Like, we can't just wait for 4 years to vote again and hope
That's
that
right.
we've done, that things will shift and people will be turned off by Trump enough. Like, no, no, no. Right now, we've got to actually link arms with folks. And I'll say one last thing on this linking arms
Please.
piece. And this is really challenging. Like, I know I was thinking yesterday, just reading a lot of other Black folk who are just frustrated because in some ways, like, anti-Blackness is so pervasive,
Mm.
and it impacts even some of the movement work that we're trying to do. And so often it feels like Black people show up for a lot of other
Yeah.
folks and a lot of folks don't show up for
Yeah.
us, right? And so there's this frustration. But I will say this, like, there is no there will be no broad transformation. God's
Mm.
revolution will not take place without a broad coalition
Yeah.
of folks who are linking arms, who are able to see that our lives are intertwined together, that our futures are intertwined, our well-being and our thriving are intertwined together. And so my liberation is your
Yeah.
liberation. My healing is your healing, right? We've got to get to a point to actually see that, to practice beloved community just as much as we're pursuing it.
Mm.
But I do hope that as we try to pursue broader coalitions,
Yeah.
we're going to have to take seriously anti-Blackness, not just
Mm.
white supremacy, but anti-Blackness itself, I think, as part of the work. Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good, Drew. It's so helpful. I mean, I'm just thinking right now, especially about how much things have changed for me in terms of, there was a time in my life when I would said all the things in terms of like, well, so long as you share the same creed as I do, so long as we sing the same hymn, whatever, then like we're connected. And I know one of the gifts for me at what I'm doing at DePaul, Imam Alameen has become one of my very best friends. And it's so interesting how at this point now, I'd be quick to say, I feel infinitely more connected
Oh,
with
yeah.
my mom friend who absolutely believes in a liberating
Yep.
God of
Yep.
justice. And
Yep.
there's it's undeniably, there is so much more of a sense of the spirit of God there, that where other folks, hey, I'm glad that you
Yep.
say the creed or like whatever. I don't
Right.
recognize anything that you're doing.
Yep.
There are no spirits that
Your
I'm
life
discerning that I want to be
doesn't
connected to.
profess the
That's
creed,
right.
right?
Yes, yes, that's right. That's right. One of the things I
Uh,
love about what's happening with just the inverse community too is just the capacity for people who maybe feel on the margins of the communities that they come from, to be able to find each other in
Yeah.
some of those kind of spaces has been so beautiful to see. That, like, yeah, you might feel on the outskirts of the tradition that you come from,
Right.
but I do think there's a real way that people right now can and must find each other.
Yeah.
So thank you. I want to be so respectful of your time, but I just can't thank you enough for your work and for your witness. Is there anything else, just in terms of, I don't know, just a final charge or reflection, anything that's stirring in you? I mean, I just feel like this has been a bath for my soul. I'm so grateful for your friendship.
The only thing I would say, one of the things I've been, and this is not just for the election, I've been saying it pretty much for a little while, but I think it is especially meaningful for the election. I think about the Hebrew scriptures. One of the things that we see is um, just this deep wisdom that the wicked prosper
Yeah,
often, right?
yeah.
And I feel like, like I want to tell people, like, go sit with Jeremiah 12 for a little
Mm,
bit and just his case
mm,
against God, right?
mm.
That
Yeah,
why do the wicked prosper, right?
yeah,
And I think there's something meaningful about just acknowledging, because there's this quick, you know, there's this temptation to want to associate God with
right,
winning, right? And
right.
triumphalism and all of that. Um, Black folk, Native Americans in this land, we know better,
Yeah.
right? That the wicked do
Mm,
prosper, right? And so what does it mean to sit with that? It doesn't answer all our questions. It's not some deep theodicy that will give
mm.
us some philosophical way to resolve that reality. But it's just the wisdom and acknowledgement that
Yeah,
that's a reality, and it's borne witness in our
yeah,
scriptures. That these are also people that knew what it was like to live on the underside of
right.
empire, right? To be crushed, to be exiled, to be humiliated and denigrated.
Mm,
And so, what does it mean? I think that those that don't know what it's like
yeah,
can learn from the wisdom both of scripture, but also peoples, right? Who've lived and have seen the victor tell the story over and over
mm,
and over again. There's some deep wisdom that can come with that. That it 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 doesn't ease the soul, but it gives a sense of orientation in the world. Recognizing that it's not about God being in control, but God is with us in the midst of that, sees
yes,
us, and I believe is still, as we co-participate with God, is ushering us to participate as well.
yeah. Oh, that's so good. And I love even this idea, Drew. But I tried to land the plane. It's just so good. But just, I feel like one of the things I've been thinking about so much lately is just the way that there is a real way that prosperity theology at this point is not just like a quirk of the charismatic movement, if you lived in Tulsa or like whatever, but almost feels like it's baked into the bones of America, this deep belief
Oh yeah,
that those who are doing
deep
well
belief.
are hashtag blessed, and even
That's
people
right.
outside the church, people
Yeah.
outside of formal Christian institutions still buy some version of that.
Still
So the wisdom right now in like
by it.
sitting with the fact, oh no, really, oftentimes the forces that are for injustice and greed, of course they win. That it actually is
Right.
how history
Yeah.
works, and it's sobering. But I think there is something about that we need to see and hear in this moment. So
And that's I mean, like, folks want to look at Solomon or this or that. They can find, look, if you want to plunder Bible verses, absolutely, there are plenty of Bible verses that you can go to that show the righteous
sure,
prospering, right? So you can go to Deuteronomy and it's going to associate blessings with obedience, right? And cursing with disobedience. So absolutely. And then you have these other texts that are saying otherwise, right? And
yeah,
there's lots of them as well.
yeah,
And then Jesus takes sides on this,
yeah,
right? He interprets the text and he's like, yo, blessed are the poor
mm,
and woe to you who are rich, right?
mm,
Blessed are those who are hungry and woe to you who are filled now.
yeah,
And so Jesus actually takes sides and help us interpret these traditions, this wisdom tradition, how to make sense and weed through it in a way that challenges mainstream American Christianity. That's why I often say, not just because I know a lot of Christians who be like, oh yeah, that prosperity gospel stuff is bad,
hmm,
right? But I'm like, they're functionally prosperity gospel too. And they're actually
absolutely,
calling all the wins in their life as blessings, right?
absolutely,
And they can't see God at work again, among the most vulnerable in our communities, those that have
Mm.
been crucified by our society.
Yeah, gosh, it's so good, Drew. I just, again, I can't thank you enough for your friendship, for your work, for your witness. It's so critical. I plug the books hard off the right out of the gate. But is there any, in terms of folks that want to stay connected to you and to your work, anything else that they should be aware of in terms of what's coming, or just how to stay connected with you online?
Yeah, stay tuned. I'm literally this week. It's a strange time to be finishing, but maybe it's the appropriate time. I'm literally wrapping up the final lines of the first draft of my manuscript for a new book that I'm working on. It's my Anabaptism book, Black
Oh, that's
Theology,
amazing.
Anabaptism, Christendom, white supremacy, anti-black, and all of that. It's coming and thinking about what does it mean to
Wow.
actually follow Jesus in the midst of that history, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's exactly the moment that we're in. Didn't anticipate this being the context that I'd be writing the final
Yeah.
lines, but here we are, and it's appropriate. So yeah, people can stay tuned for that. Obviously, me and Jared on Inverse Podcast. And you can find me, I do a lot of public speaking, and I consider myself more than just a, you know, scholarly theologian. I actually think of myself as a church theologian. So I love
Yes.
doing stuff in communities and churches, engaging folks that actually want to have meaningful dialogue around what does it mean to follow Jesus, yield to the Spirit, and participate in what God is doing in the world, right? So catch me. I'll be in Boston, I think, in a week and a half, and I've got some other stuff coming up. But yeah.
Brilliant, and I'm so excited that you're finishing the book. What all of your books have been ones that I've gifted often, and that I return to regularly. So thank you so much for that for that ministry in particular. But so good to see you, my friend. Please take care of
Yeah.
yourself, and just so grateful for the time.
Yeah, likewise. It's always good to hang out with you. It's been too long,
It,
so this has been
it's been too long. Yeah, it's so good to see your face. I can't wait to see you in person. We got to make that happen sooner rather than later. Take care, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.